Growing up in the 90s, I remember watching my older brother play Final Fantasy IV on the Super Nintendo. The gameplay, and especially the music, made an unforgettable impression. Because of that, I've played almost every Final Fantasy game. And somehow, 30 years later, this series is still one of the most relevant franchises in gaming. That staying power isn't an accident, it comes down to a core formula. This video is about gameplay mechanics in the Final Fantasy series. It is not a critique of their individual story or framing. How we feel about stories and characters is subjective, and I want to focus on something more concrete. And gameplay is arguably more important than the story, as it is the one thing players have control over in a Final Fantasy game. So if you love RPGs where the combat shines, games like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, Baldur's Gate 3, or even the classic BioWare games, this video is for you. So let's crack the code of Final Fantasy. But first, a little history. Final Fantasy was the brainchild of Hironobu Sakaguchi. The first game drew upon the tabletop DNA of Dungeons & Dragons, Western RPGs like Ultima, and of course Dragon Quest. This was the game Sakaguchi had always wanted to make. Its success didn't just save Square, it launched a franchise that has sold hundreds of millions of copies. Over time, the series became synonymous with Yoshitaka Amano's art and Nobu Uematsu's iconic music. In my opinion, Final Fantasy VI was a turning point for the series. Sakaguchi stepped back from directing, with Yoshinori Kitase and Hiroyuki Ito taking the reins. This was the beginning of the modern Final Fantasy we know today. Kitase grew up watching movies on the big screen. Films like Star Wars inspired him to study filmmaking in college. His vision transformed Final Fantasy from a game into something that felt like a movie. From the opening credits of 6, there's an obvious attempt to make the game feel more cinematic. That ambition grew, with FMV cutscenes and eventually voice acting. But even as the presentation evolved, these games remained Final Fantasy at their core, built on the same formula that turned a dying company into an industry juggernaut. Is there a formula to a Final Fantasy game? Yes, there is, and I'm going to break it down into 4 pillars. Final Fantasy, at its core, is a role-playing game. The core gameplay revolves around fighting monsters and receiving experience that unlocks new, more powerful abilities. Players also upgrade their weapons and armor. All of this creates a clear progression where the player feels stronger and stronger. What keeps this series so fresh is how it constantly reinvents these RPG mechanics. From the job system in Final Fantasy III, Materia in 7, or the sphere grid in 10. Each entry finds a new way to give players meaningful choices. And in a game like Final Fantasy, where the story has only one path forward, it's vital to give players a robust RPG system, so they have some choice in how they play. Without this, the gameplay becomes style over substance. Flashy combat that looks good in a trailer but gets stale fast. What makes Final Fantasy characters resonate so well isn't just good writing, it's also that the player controls them. During combat and exploration, you decide what they do. You choose their abilities. You direct them in combat. You decide who's in your party and who sits on the bench. Over dozens of hours, you develop a relationship with each character based on how you played them. They're not just party members anymore, they're your avatars. You're invested in these characters because of their unique abilities during battle. And you're devastated when you lose someone you spent hours making stronger. When control is taken away, so is the player's agency. At that point, characters can stop feeling like party members and start feeling like NPCs. A fully controllable party also creates the most tense moments in the game, like waiting for your turn to cast a devastating spell, or scrambling to revive a fallen teammate before it's game over. That's not cutscene drama, that's your drama. There's a moment in almost every Final Fantasy where the world suddenly opens up. Get an airship. You look at the map and you realize you can go anywhere. That feeling is irreplaceable. This is when most players explore the world. Complete side quests, find rare equipment, unlock new summons, and fight super bosses. Since Final Fantasy VI, this optional content has become just as important as the main quest. It's what makes the world feel alive. And since Final Fantasy X, no mainline entry has had a traditional world map. Except for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Building a fully explorable world with modern graphics is a massive undertaking. But there are creative solutions. World maps from the Pixel to the PS1 era were stylized. More diorama than simulation. Rebirth took a different approach, recreating the world at something closer to a 1-to-1 scale. Both can work. Even Tetsuya Nomura has said, "I thought that you can't really have an RPG without a world map." In a Final Fantasy game, the player embarks on a quest to save the world. And it's important that you should see that world and how it changes around you. The land scarred by a madman. A meteor looming in the sky. Or a paintress in the distance. The world map isn't just navigation, it's storytelling. Final Fantasy was unbelievably fortunate to have Nobu Uematsu defining the sound of the series for so long. His classics still get performed in concerts and are rearranged constantly, not out of nostalgia, but because the compositions genuinely hold up. Think of the opera scene from Final Fantasy VI. or To Xanarkand in 10. You just don't hear those tracks, you feel them. They're not background music, they're why you remember those moments decades later. And that's because music is the emotional engine, not just for movies, but for video games too. It tells your brain this moment matters. Across the series, there's a common musical foundation, a memorable main theme, recurring leitmotifs, and battle music catchy enough to carry dozens of hours of combat. This is still one of the series' strongest and most widely recognized pillars, even if a few entries have fallen short of the high bar Uematsu set. Those are my 4 pillars of Final Fantasy. Now, you might be wondering, what about the crystals? Chocobos? The classic turn-based combat? I left those out on purpose. They're iconic, but they're not what makes a great Final Fantasy game. That may be a hot take, but what matters is deep RPG systems, real player agency, a world worth exploring, and music that never gets old. It's okay for Final Fantasy to experiment. Every entry has. But there's a difference between evolution and trend chasing. And lately, it's felt more like the latter. This series isn't immune to industry pressure. Final Fantasy X only took 2 years to make, and 15 took 10. The longer the development stretches out, the more tempting it is to cut out complex systems to minimize cost. Final Fantasy used to have a tight-knit group of creators driving its vision. Sakaguchi, Katase, Nomura, and Uematsu. Now, it feels like Square Enix is throwing ideas against the wall and hoping they stick. But there's hope. The most celebrated games of the past few years haven't been the safest. They've been the ones that trusted players with deep, demanding gameplay systems. Look at Expedition 33. It won numerous Game of the Year awards and became the most celebrated release of 2025. It followed the Final Fantasy formula, and it resonated, not just with JRPG fans, but with mainstream audiences too. It's not nostalgia, that's proof. Expedition 33 embraced RPG systems with the use of Pictos and skill trees for each character. You also controlled the party during turn-based combat with its own unique twist. There was even a blue mage in Monoko who ate enemies to learn their abilities, which is literally a character from Final Fantasy IX. It also had tons of optional content, including a secret final boss, a fully explorable world map, and yes, an airship in the form of Eske. The music was also brilliant, with banger battle music, unique boss tunes, and memorable emotional tracks. Baldur's Gate 3 tells a similar story. It gave the player an incredible degree of freedom in gameplay and story, compelling you to replay the game and try new, different things. And although Baldur's Gate 3 didn't have an airship, it also didn't need one. There were no guardrails, no narrow hallways pushing you forward, just massive, carefully crafted areas, and the absolute freedom to wander wherever you wanted. And the game rewarded exploration at every turn with something unique. These games both followed the Final Fantasy formula, showing that it works and is still relevant to gamers. They succeeded not in spite of their complexity, but because of it. Final Fantasy means a lot to me, and I look forward to playing more games in the series. But what do I actually want the next entry to be like? What should Final Fantasy XVII do? Well, I hope the success of Expedition 33 emboldens Square Enix to make a proper JRPG again, with in-depth gameplay that gives the player freedom. They could even bring back the job system. Let me choose what role each character plays. Let me control the party members' actions in combat. Final Fantasy XVII could even bring back the 4-member party size, so I have even more room to experiment and try different things. The next Final Fantasy game also needs a fully explorable world map. Bring back vehicles and airships. Take the time to add optional post-game content, hidden weapons and spells, secret bosses. And it doesn't have to be a fully realistic simulation in Unreal Engine 5. And make the music a priority from day one. Each character needs their own leitmotifs, a recognizable theme that makes you feel things instantly, battle music that can hold up to hours of gameplay, and a unique main theme that'll define Final Fantasy XVII. The formula isn't a constraint. It's more of a blueprint. That's the Final Fantasy I fell in love with, and I think it's the Final Fantasy people are still hungry for. It may seem like I'm being critical of the more recent entries in the series, and that the type of game I want is both antiquated and impractical to make. But this is Square Enix's flagship series, and yet, when Expedition 33 came out, it scratched that Final Fantasy itch better than the recent Final Fantasy games. That should be a wake-up call for key people at Square, like Katase. They need to be bold and embrace the 4 pillars that not only save their company, but keep succeeding even today. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If this video resonated with you, please leave a comment and let me know what you want Final Fantasy XVII to be. And if you enjoyed this, drop a like and subscribe. It really helps. You can also watch live gameplay almost every day at twitch.tv/topramens. See you in the next one.